Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
People say that life is the thing, but I prefer reading.
Hello, welcome to Sundaku, the podcast for anyone who can't walk past a book without having a quick read of the back cover. I'm Annie Hastwell.
And I'm Sarah Martin. There's an emerging genre of outback thriller known as Aussie noir. Today on Sundaku, we meet the man who pretty well started it 30 years ago. Garry Disher has just produced another novel, Day's End.
We'll hear Kath Keneally's interview with Garry Disher in just a moment. And after that, I talked to US writer Saar Shahar. We met Saar on Sundaku recently when he talked about his research into the 17th century media frenzy around Captain Cook and Joseph Banks. Saar's also an exponent of the genre known as literary journalism, and we'll have a chat about what that means, who the heroes are, and we'll hear about Saar's own adventures in a piece he has written about a visit to a psychic expo. Here's a taste of that.
The mental space of the Hilton felt light and airy that weekend, relieved of the burden of proof that weighed down so much of the sciences and mainstream media. Energy healers beamed energies, channelers channeled the dead and the divine, cults and multi-level marketers marketed solutions, all while the exhalations of unmasked conspiracy theorists hewed the air. In my usual circles, adding myself as vaccinated earned me points as a responsible individual with defanged droplets. But at Conscious Life, the reversal of norms kept bringing the witches of Macbeth to mind. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air.
First to Garry Disher. He's published over 50 books in multiple genres over a long writing career. He's best known for 3 series of novels that he thinks of as novels first and crime second. The Chalice and Destry series, set in the Mornington Peninsula, the Wyatt series, whose anti-hero is a thief without a conscience, and the latest series, 4 In and Another on the Way, set in South Australia's mid-north, a place Garry Disher is very familiar with, as he grew up in the copper mining town of Burra. This latest novel, Day's End, has as its protagonist a policeman called Hirsch, or Senior Constable Paul Hirschhausen. Hirsch has been posted to the small fictional town of Tiverton as punishment. Kath Keneally has been a Disher devotee for decades, and she asked Garry how well Hirsch fits into his beat, an area the size of Belgium, and what sorts of trouble he's dealing with in Day's End.
He's a city boy, city guy. He's still low 30s. He belonged to an outer suburban Adelaide CIB squad that proved to be corrupt. And the squad was disbanded. Some members were jailed. One committed suicide. And Hirsch, who hadn't been working for the squad for very long, some of the mud stuck to him. There was some suspicion that he was a whistleblower or that he might have been corrupt himself. So he was busted down back to uniform and sent to a one-officer police station around about 3 hours north of Adelaide, halfway between Adelaide and the Flinders Ranges, say, as a kind of punishment, I suppose. So he's a fish out of water. There are 2 elements, I think, that make it very useful for me as a writer to create tension. And one is that he's a lowly constable, because in most crime fiction, the main character is quite senior, like an inspector with a whole team of officers working for him or her. So that's useful for tension. And the second thing is that as a fish out of water, he's running twin investigations, if you like. One is the circumstances of the crimes that he comes across, because often he's the first responder. And the second investigation is what makes this place tick.
Yeah.
How can I live here? How can I understand it? Yeah, straight away I knew he had to be an outsider. He's underappreciated. He's elbowed aside by senior cops if there's a serious crime. But also, often he's just as much a welfare officer, a counsellor, as a lawmaker or lawbringer. Like in Day's End, for example, there are two teenage kids who are basically the carers for their bipolar mother. They appear in one of the earlier novels, but they have a much more central role in this one. And that's part of his job, to call in on people who need some, whose health might not be good, who are suffering some sort of welfare distress. He looks in on them. So that's part of his job.
What I love about how this series is evolving, the time frame for Day's End is only a couple of weeks, but a reasonable amount of the book, even though an awful lot of crime is going on, is devoted to his weekly patrols. And he visits, as you say, in the role of a social worker almost, quite unsolvable cases, in inverted commas. These are just the people that he keeps an eye on. And that gives you the opportunity to paint us a very loving and detailed picture of who his constituents are. And you seem to get as much pleasure out of that, I certainly do as a reader, as from talking about the crime proper.
Yeah, as the series has progressed, that's become more important to me. I've gained a better appreciation of what his daily life might be like. It's not entirely invented. I did read a long newspaper article a few years ago about a cop in a remote part of Victoria based at a one-officer police station, and he gave a sense too of, certainly there were a lot of drug crimes and theft of stock and theft of machinery and those sorts of things, but at the same time he was checking up on people all the time, see if they're doing all right.
Yeah, and you just leave those stories open-ended to come back to perhaps in later editions. So this series does remind me of the Peninsula series in the sense that you keep your focus on the growth of petty and serious crime on top of a decaying social order out in those regions. The peninsula is thought of as fairly glamorous, but obviously there's the underbelly of, the forgotten people. And the same thing out in rural South Australia, people who are isolated and bored and stagnating and an absolute magnet for trouble. So who are the troublemakers around Tiverton this time?
All the way through the book, and it's explained much later in the book, there is troubling behaviour from young men. They do a kind of Nazi goose-stepping march through the local supermarket, for example. There's racist daubing on the local Indigenous centre. And there's clearly, as the book progresses, there's clearly something going on amongst young men there. But there's also, it's set in the era of COVID, and I do that deliberately. We have a husband who storms into the local doctor's surgery and starts ripping masks off people because he's a COVID denier, he's an anti-vaxxer. So a lot of these things are sometimes loosely linked, but they all part of the same sort of undercurrent of confusion and misrepresentation and ignorance that we found during the COVID era and still do, of course.
And Hirsch is struggling with his own intolerance of these people, and he's in trouble for calling one of them a bad name.
Yeah, he's recorded and goes a little slightly viral, and he's hauled over the coals by his senior officer because the police are expected not to have views but to be neutral. And Hirsch can't be. He
can't be seen to be partial. And he has a very understanding and level-headed sergeant in Redruth who keeps him in check. You lead us through him to feel sympathy for the confused and emotional ordinary people in Tiverton and the surrounds, but not for the much more sinister mob who seem to have planted themselves beyond the local big property. That's quite nasty. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I've been reading about far right groups for a very long time. There's a lot about them in the papers at the moment, but it's been growing, the newspaper stories about far right actions. Like, for example, a few months ago, these guys gave the Nazi salute in a restaurant in Melbourne. Mm. So it's happening all around us. There are quite a few of these young men belonging to these groups. They're considered by the federal police to be much more dangerous than Islamic fundamentalists. Mm. The federal police, their great fear is someone like that guy who shot 50 Muslim people in Christchurch, New Zealand. They don't want another case of that. So I was building on these newspaper clippings I've been keeping for many years, and one in particular interested me about a group in New South Wales buying rural properties so that they could do their militaristic training out of the public eye. I thought, this might happen in Hirsch's neck of the woods. So.
Well, factoring that in, the body count rises pretty steeply at the end of the book. Not quite Midsummer Murders territory, but quite a lot for the mid-north.
Yeah, I know.
I wonder what sort of feedback you get from local readers in that area.
Generally pretty good. I get maybe one a month from someone who's lived in the area or travelled through it. Or I must admit, my late father, when he read the first in the Hirsch series, because he's a wheat and wool farmer, and there was a rather nasty wheat and wool farmer in the first Hirsch novel, and he didn't quite like my depiction of farmers of the mid-north. I had to tell him it's a story, Dad.
In the way that you do, you've got your finger on the pulse of those social malaises, that's right, the far-right anti-government mob, the anti-vaxxers, the dispossessed, the people who have come up from the city, the Ma gang, shall we call them, because it's got a little bit too difficult for them to keep their particular nastiness going in the city surrounds because it's become more expensive. And they have a poor bunny who's been given a rural house in the hope that it'll pull him out of himself. They force him into their kind of badness. They are a particularly vivid.
Yeah. Again, it's based on vague things I've picked up along the way, talking to police officers or just reading about it in the newspaper of, for whatever reason, maybe the cost of housing, the scrutiny of law enforcement, criminals go to country towns and buy houses cheap, run their operations there. I've read about loose gangs of people who, some of them might be related or married to each other or whatever, engaging in ripping off vulnerable people who might be on pensions, siphoning off their pensions, those sorts of that might happen in a rural area.
Do you feel the need to balance those things out with some happy stuff?
Well, we do have Hirsch's love life in the series, because Day's End is the number 4. He meets a widow who has a daughter of primary school age, and as the series progresses, he becomes involved with them. It's not just the ever after sort of relationship. The woman is quite a strong character, and when Hirsch is being evasive, for example, or whatever it might be, she'll pull him up. I'm trying to just depict a realistic sort of relationship rather than just a girlfriend on the side, a minor character who has no particular role.
She's great. Wendy's great. She's very self-sufficient, and it's probably not going to throw her too much off course, whatever happens between her and him.
I mean, she won't take any bullshit from him, but it's still a loving relationship.
All of this is open-ended. You don't wind any of these strands up in any particular book. We just wait to see what happens in the next one. But something a little bit different in this book, and I notice in the acknowledgements you credit a friend with giving you a bit of a nudge to include Auntie Steph and what she's all about. Can you tell us about her?
Right from the start, Hirsch has been aware of the Indigenous presence in the district, the Nadjari people. For example, he goes to an outback station and might see rock art in a cave. And in the second book, I think, in the series, he finds a journal kept by a woman in the 1860s, 1870s, and realises that in one passage this woman has described a massacre. So he's always been aware of that historical presence. But a reader, an Indigenous woman from Melbourne, wrote to me one day and said she loved that I do that in the book, but she said, where are the living Indigenous people? And, well, I mean, obviously, there's a good kick in the bum for me. She's heavily involved in social welfare issues, youth justice issues and so on in Victoria. So I've had very long conversations with her and came up with a way of weaving Auntie Steph into the story, a strong woman who's helping local Indigenous people with a cultural centre and a drop-in centre and those sorts of things, which of course encourages a bit of racism locally and so on.
Very much like how spiky you keep her. She does not give an inch. But she does offer at least the seed of another way forward for the youth of the community who are looking for something to do and something to hang their hat on.
Yeah, I haven't thought about the next novel in the series, number 5, but I think she'll also have a strong role there.
As always, one of the joys of this series is just the landscape. You do, because Paul's out driving so much of the time, it's a little bit like watching a movie of the scenery going by as he goes from place to place. You're always feeling out people's place in the landscape.
Well, I grew up there, so I know the area, and I'm aware that Hirsch didn't grow up there. He's still getting to know the area, but it'll never be quite home. That brings me to a writerly observation that setting matters in fiction. I used to teach creative writing, and I think my students paid no attention to setting whatsoever, that to them all that mattered was story and character, and they'd pay no attention to the setting. To them, or in the way they used setting, it was static. But a setting is dynamic. I think the setting, if it carefully portrayed by the writer, it can bring the reader into it. You can smell things, you can hear things, you can see shifts in the light quality and that sort of thing, and it helps to encourage the reader to be in the scene, which can make the writing more powerful, I think. And the setting has an effect on character. People respond to it warmly, or it has a negative effect on them. It can even affect a plot. You know, suddenly Hirsch is driving along chasing a bad guy and he's cut off by a bushfire, to use a very obvious sort of example. I haven't used it in any of the books, but that's how setting can affect a plot. So setting is never static. It plays a really important role in fiction, I think, and in mine.
Yeah, and I absolutely savour it in this series, being a South Australian, and I keep imposing, remembered scenarios and ideas of where he might be. I mean, a lot of the places he's in are real places, so I can imagine them. But others, it's just my stock of childhood memories get superimposed over where I'm imagining he is. It's just fantastic. I thought I might wind up by asking you another writerly question, and to do with the demands of genre, because in lots of ways these books don't conform particularly to the genre. In some ways they do. And I wondered how conscious you were of pushing the envelope there.
I'm pushing my own envelope, really, rather than pushing the envelope for the sake of it. Obviously, I'm using crime writing tropes in these books. A crime is committed and it's investigated. But without sounding too wanky, I think what I'm doing is writing novels about characters in suffering some sort of strain, reacting to strain of various kinds. And often that strain derives from a criminal act of some kind. So I'd like to think of myself as a novelist who happens to write about crime rather than a crime novelist. So character matters to me a lot, and I enjoy exploring characterization and responses and so on, rather than thinking about heavily plot-driven way of structuring my books.
And that's why I like them. Can we wind up finally with a reference to your anti-hero, your alter ego, Wyatt, who is an actual bad guy, psychopath? Is he still going?
Kind of, in the sense that the book I'm writing at the moment is a standalone, but it's using a young thief called Grace, a young woman who's a thief like Wyatt, who appears in, I think, the second to last of the Chalice novels, one of those. And she kept tapping me on the shoulder, like Hirsch did. The first Hirsch novel was meant to be just a standalone, but he kept tapping me on the shoulder. And Grace, the young thief, has too. So she's an anti-hero in the sense that, she breaks into houses, she steals things. But the character Wyatt, who I've written 9 of those, 6 early in my writing career and 3 more recent years. He robs banks and payroll vans and that sort of thing. I think all fiction is driven by a question of some kind, or all writing really, non-fiction, poetry, fiction, even shopping lists, driven by a question. And most crime fiction is, the question driving them is who done it, or more likely these days it's a question like what sort of person did it, why did they do it, how might they be uncovered. But the question driving the Wyatt novels is simply, will he get away with it?
That's right.
So, they're fun to write. And readers sometimes say to me, I don't approve of him, but I want him to win. But I think crime fiction taps into a darker side of ourselves, like the side that can imagine pulling the perfect crime, or getting revenge on someone who's done us wrong.
Yeah.
We don't do these things, but we can imagine doing it through crime fiction.
Author Garry Disher speaking with Kath Keneally about his latest book, Day's End.
And now to literary journalism. Inside the heart of many, not all, journalists is the desire to write with colour and verve about the facts. Literary journalism, or creative non-fiction, goes back to when writers like Mark Twain first started putting themselves in the story. American academic and former guest on this podcast, Saar Shahar, researches that genre, and he also writes in the literary journalistic style. He has a piece published this month in the North American Review called Among the Anti-vaxxers, and in it he takes us, the reader, with him as he visits a psychic expo at the height of the COVID pandemic.
I thought this might be something that I could write well about. Even though it is journalism, I thought about it more as like travel literature, like somebody goes someplace and they sort of have an interesting experience, and hopefully if they write about it well, if they're going to an unusual place, unusual for the reader, then it's something that can be fodder for kind of some sort of literary thing that they're trying to do. So that's kind of how I approached it. I thought maybe I could do something interesting.
Okay, well, tell us about the article. You arrived in the dark days of COVID. There was a Delta surge at the time. You were vaccinated, and you were obviously in quite an alternate reality. Can you describe some of the things that were on offer and how you felt being a good vaccinated person in the middle of it?
Well, there's a lot of things on offer. There's, all kinds of crystals. There's all kinds of readers, which I learned, there's a difference between a psychic and a channeler and a palm reader, and they get quite offended if you confuse those terms. And there's people selling, sacred geometry pendants. There's a lot of different treatments. There's body work, there's energy work, there's people who do massage, people who kind of combine some of these things, and, maybe they do a reading and then they sense that your chakras are off, and, then you kind of get a reading combined with some kind of supplement to clear your chakras. So it's just kind of a hodgepodge of different new age novelties. It's very much like being kind of like at a fair and amusement park, and you kind of see what, rides are available. Instead of a ride, it's some sort of healing experience or fortune telling or supplement experience. And that's kind of how you feel as you're walking through the aisles, that different people are trying to get your attention with kind of different gimmicks, and you kind of get to choose who gets your valuable attention.
So you were more than just a reporter, though. You're kind of in the story, and you're not trying to cynically expose, a whole lot of quacks. You actually feel more and more as your story goes on, more and more sympathy and attraction to what's on offer. Can you explain what your part is in this whole world of New Age remedies?
I used to work with my father right after I finished art school. I kind of went along with him, and he was offering this treatment that purported to align your first cervical vertebra, which is the topmost vertebra of your spine, the atlas bone. It would kind of, once it's aligned, the alignment is supposed to spread throughout the whole body and then create this kind of spiritual and physical balance. And I was, a salesman, very much like the salesman and saleswomen I describe in my piece. So, I'd try to get the attention of people walking down the aisle and try to see if they wanted a free checkup. And then, of course, the free checkup always finds that they do need a treatment. And so I thought, when I was there, it would be kind of boring to do kind of just a takedown or exposing kind of quackery, even though I don't subscribe to any of this stuff, and, even astrology and stuff, which is pretty mainstream, kind of is not my jam at all. But I thought it would be, from a writing perspective, much more interesting to think about what parts of this actually maybe excited me or enticed me a little bit, especially coming back older and being a little bit wiser or more sympathetic to what might drive people to see these remedies, because they certainly offer something. It's not something that can be empirically proven, but they offer some sort of experience that people are willing to pay for and claim helps them often.
And you would have found that with your father, because you say in the piece somewhere that years later people would come back still glowing with how it had changed their life, having their vertebrae rearranged.
That's right. They were people that my father had treated in some cases a decade before, and they were adamant that their atlas was still in place, and that, it was kind of a life-changing treatment, and it had helped them or loved ones that had gotten it. So, yeah, I'm sure if, we took an X-ray and see it, is everybody's atlas out? Probably not. So, again, these claims are not empirically verifiable, but, some kind of very strong placebo that is having some kind of effect on people.
This obviously was in a time of COVID too, and there was quite a strong anti-vax feeling. Obviously, the name of the piece reflects that. What was going on there, though? Because you say it wasn't really talked about. It was like the elephant in the room.
Yeah, it was the elephant in the room in the sense that, every exhibitor and attendee wanted to talk about it. And it immediately came up with me because I'm wearing a mask, which outs me immediately as somebody who, subscribes to a version of the world where COVID is infectious and we should be careful to watch out for it, and not a hoax by Bill Gates. So it was the elephant in the room because it wasn't at all part of the expo literature. There was no talks about it. There was no headliners, which is the headliner you would assume would be about, some sort of anti-vax theory. And then there were famous speakers who, from way before COVID were adamantly against vaccines, such as Lynn McTaggart, who I believe wrote the Vaccine Bible, was there, but she was not talking about vaccines at all. And so what had, become apparent was that the expo producer was a pro-vax guy. And so his lineup of speakers was, I imagine he must have, not made that an option and not tried to capitalize on it. Although I will make an addendum to my piece, because I went back to this year, to the 2023 Conscious Life, and it was packed. It was 3 floors. It was so crowded. It was the opposite of how it is in my piece. And some of the biggest speakers there were talking exclusively about COVID, and there was a whole lineup of speakers called Down the Rabbit Hole. And I sense he must have done a 180. I didn't get to talk to him about it, so I don't know what his rationale is. But just from talking to him before, he's a businessman. He might not believe, unless he did a 180, but he might still believe, that getting vaccinated is a good idea. I know he was vaccinated when I talked to him. But if you're a New Age expo producer in Los Angeles and you're trying to get the big crowds, the big draw, that's exactly what you want. You want a lineup called Down the Rabbit Hole, and you want to invite all the biggest, anti-vax conspiracy theory people, and that's really going to bring, huge crowds, which it did.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And a bit depressing, actually. So when you're part of your story, which is what makes it such a good read, what you write is called literary journalism. Give us a bit of a description of what literary journalism is and why it differs from normal journalism.
This is actually kind of a hard distinction to make. It's really hard to track down where does literary journalism begin, because already in the 1770s, and I'm sure we can find examples even before that, people are taking these, travel journals and trying to make them literary, not just, kind of bland reports. When I think of literary journalism, I think most people think of new journalism from the 1960s and 70s with the big names such as Tom Wolfe and Hunter S. Thompson and Joan Didion. And that's certainly a very famous example of a certain kind of literary journalism. But it's a hard question to answer, really, and there's not necessarily clear demarcation of what literary journalism is. But I guess one answer that I can give is there's sort of the kind of view of the objective newspaper reporter who's going to strike kind of a neutral tone and kind of work in kind of a bland reporting kind of style. And literary journalism tries to break away from that and do something distinct stylistically or tone-wise. It's going to, if you read Joan Didion or Hunter S. Thompson or Tom Wolfe, any of those writers, like within a paragraph, the voice is so distinctive, you know exactly who's writing because the personality is so on the page.
Do you have to be in it? Do you think that's necessarily a part of, does it have to include your own experiences, or can you be a literary journalist just by using the techniques of literature and creating a beautiful story around something that's relevant at the time?
Oh, you certainly don't have to be in it. I mean, Joan Didion and Hunter S. Thompson obviously interject themselves a lot, and a lot of literary journals do that, but Tom Wolfe, for example, is usually barely or not at all in his stories. So his persona or his, a narrator that's kind of his avatar is not in there, but he is in it in the sense that his style is in it. His own kind of distinct voice is there. But no, you don't have to do first-person narration.
His most remembered book, possibly, there's a couple of them actually, but is the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. What does he do in that book and why is it remembered?
Well, the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test is he's following around Ken Kesey. And Ken Kesey is the famous author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he tries to kind of he does start his own kind of commune or band of people he calls the Merry Pranksters. Electric Kool-Aid is LSD, and they're doing a lot of LSD and throwing parties where they spike Kool-Aid with LSD. And Tom Wolfe hung out with them for like 3 months and then very quickly actually wrote a whole kind of novel, nonfiction novel about their kind of touring around America in this kind of muraled bus and, meeting different people and doing acid and throwing acid parties. And what he does in that book is kind of what he does throughout his whole career, which is he brings a lot of literary techniques to journalism, nonfiction. He's sort of taking the perspective of whoever he's writing about, like you would in a novel, and he switches POVs a lot. So you get this wonderful thing that occurs throughout his writing where he's kind of getting really enthused and kind of carried away in kind of the spirit of what he's showing, and then he switches POVs and then it kind of gets undercut. So he has all these wonderful scenes where, one thing that Ken Kesey, he kind of becomes a cult leader in the book. What he tells the pranksters throughout the novel is, you're either on the bus or off the bus, because they're touring around in a muraled bus. And, you know, sometimes it appears and it seems very profound, and sometimes it appears and it seems completely comical and absurd, and sometimes it just takes on so many different meanings. Actually, I think The Right Stuff is Tom Wolfe's best nonfiction novel, or just book in general, better than Bonfire, the Vanities even. You know, because he's constantly oscillating between kind of romanticism or mock romanticization, mock enthusiasm, and kind of undercutting. It's not clear what position he is. So in The Right Stuff is about the Mercury missions, which are about astronauts who are going to space, and he kind of mocks the endeavor because it's supposed to be the most manly thing you can do among the astronauts. Like, they're the top of the pyramid of fighter pilots and astronauts is to go into space, the fighter pilots who get recruited as astronauts. Why I bring this up is because there's one critic who read The Right Stuff and it's like, oh, this is a critique of how, you know, stupid the space race is. It's all these fighter pilots who are competing to go to space. It's just a huge, big status thing. And he doesn't write about like the wonder or fascination about space at all. It's just a big status game between pilots, and then bigger, the space race, you know, between communism and capitalism in America. But then you read Scott Kelly, who's an astronaut. He's famous for spending the most amount of days in space at the space station. He says, The Right Stuff completely inspired me, and this is what made me want to be an astronaut. And the fact that, you know, Tom Wolfe has created this, you know, this nonfiction narrative where it's not clear what the point of view is, works on a level of art where it's so open to interpretation. It's not clear when he's ridiculing and satirizing and when he's like completely embodying the thing that, you know, he's depicting.
Do you feel that literary journalism is still alive and well?
Definitely. I mean, there's so many great people who are working in that vein. Yeah, certainly. It's sort of them doing the work of going to the place that you're reporting on and really sort of, you know, taking in the scene and really, you know, maybe shadowing somebody so you can really, you know, it's just like spending a prolonged amount of time somewhere so that you can report on it accurately.
Literary academic from the University of Southern California, Saar Shahar. And his story, Among the Anti-vaxxers, is published in the North American Review. And we'll put more information on that in the Sundoku show notes.
You're listening to Sundoku, the podcast for reading addicts.
Hi, I'm Paul Gough. I am a producer for local radio in ABC Adelaide, a friend of Michaela's. I think the thing that really got me going was fantasy. I loved the Tolkien series. I got really into that, although I didn't ever quite gel to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which had been pushed upon me on many occasions. But Tolkien captured my imagination, and Tolkien set in motion something that I've done all my life, and that is I love something so much, I find it hard to pick up a new book at the end of it, and often I'll go back and start again. And so that's been the pattern. So to what I'm reading right now, I start books and I just am so busy, I find myself not engaging like I used to. There is a book that I'd started a while ago that I really, really enjoyed, and I've got about 100 pages to go, and every time I go into state or I do something, I think, great, I'm going to take this book with me, and I still haven't gotten over the finishing line. It's called To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, and that is written by Christopher Paolini. It's about a woman who encounters an alien artifact and what that means. So that's sitting on the side of my bed and has done for quite a while. One of my favourite books is by a guy called Larry Niven, and it's called Ringworld. And the thing I like about that is this, again, artifact is discovered. It's a giant ring-like structure built around an artificial sun. And the interior of the ring has the space of 1,000 Earths if you unwrap them. So the scale of this thing is just off the charts. And a very strange group of people are sort of head there to discover what's on it. And this is what I mean. I love the discovery element. The last author I'd really love to talk about, and I would probably say is my favourite author, is a guy called Russell Hoban. Now, Russell Hoban wrote a book called Turtle Diary, which became quite a famous movie. But it's the other side of Russell Hoban that is strange and slightly Dada-esque that I fell in love with. I went to my local secondhand bookstore and I saw this book called Ridley Walker, and I picked it up, and as I attempted to read it, it was in some kind of pidgin English, and I just thought, I don't even know how I could read this. So I bought it and I persevered, and it's set in England. It's post-apocalypse, and the world has really gone to rack and ruin. It's kind of Lord of the Flies in a way, and it follows a 12-year-old boy and this strange ritual and the leftovers of society, where there is a travelling fellow who tells stories using Punch and Judy puppets, and they see this as some kind of revelation. And so it's a powerful book. It's a really dark book, and it's written in this other language that you have to get your head around. So that made me inquire further into Russell Hoban, and that's when I really discovered that he was an odd bod. Sadly, he left us now, and in fact there is a group of devoted people that I discovered. And in one of his books where yellow A4 paper talks to the main character who's having writer's block, I think it's the 4th of February, Russell Hoban Day, you take a piece of yellow A4, you write your favourite quote of one of his books, and you leave it in a random location. And I remember the best one I ever did was I laminated a yellow A4 and put it in place of the fire safety codes at the ABC in Sydney, and it sat there for 6 months. So whether people just sort of brushed it off as being fire safety code, and then obviously one day someone discovered that it was this weird quote from my book.
And we'd love to hear from you. If you're keen to share your reading habits and your reading past, or even just give us a review of something you've enjoyed lately, send us a voice memo to sundokucast@gmail.com.
You can also find Sundoku just by searching TSUNDOKU cast. So whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or on another podcast player, we are there. So track us down, subscribe, tell us what you think, and tell your friends. We'd love to expand Sundoku love and make sure we're reaching all of the book addicts that are out there.
Thanks for joining us today on Sundoku. I'm Annie Hastwell.
And I'm Sarah Martin. Take care.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts who are refusing treatment.
Annie Hastwell,
Kath Keneally,
Sarah Martin,
and me, Michaela Andreev. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. And if you want to know more about the books, the authors, or the music featured in this episode, check out the show notes. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at SundokuCast. That's TSUNDOKU cast.
Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.